Hello, welcome back. Stayed with me. I've brushed my beard, I've changed my shirt, just to show that I have at least two shirts. Today I'm going to talk about something I find fascinating. I don't know whether you will, maybe not by the time I've finished. It's an area of silver that is very collectible, it's very accessible to anyone of any budget, so I think it's worth talking about. And if you've got a sweet tooth like I obviously do have, it will be dear to your heart, because we're talking about the service of sugar. Sugar tongs, and how much sugar you can get in your tea. Now, for a moment, let us imagine you and I are cast adrift and we land on a desert island with, a few supplies and just these humble tongs. And I turn to you and I say desperately, will you pass me the sugar tongs? I don't know why I need them, but let's just imagine that I do. You would not pass me these if you knew what you were doing, despite the fact that they are sugar tongs, that they were used for the service of sugar, and that very occasionally they are referred to in Georgian inventories as sugar tongs. You would pass me one of these three pairs, because when we say sugar tongs today, we mean something like this, which is a continuous piece of metal bent into a U section with sprung arms, so you can pick your sugar up. When we say sugar tongs today, this is what we mean. We call these, and believe me, it's been a matter of some debate getting there, we call these tea tongs. In the past, quite sensible, even-keeled people have fallen out over what you call these. Lots of people now might be thinking those are sugar nips or sugar nippers. Sugar nips should only be a phrase that ever leaves your mouth as a term of endearment to someone you're very close to. Sugar nippers is the sort of correct term for the steel plier-like cutters that are actually used to cut the sugar loaf down into small pieces for service at tea. They are not the silver serving tongs. Michael, how can you be so certain? How can you not start this incendiary debate all over again? Well, thankfully, in the last 10 or 12 years, the database of the Old Bailey online has come on, and it's free to access and you can search it. Now, in the 18th century, there were, surly types that looked like Bill Sikes with their dog that met Fagin in a dark alley. And they were awfully fond of pinching these from respectable households. And when they were quite rightly apprehended and brought to trial, the transcripts for those proceedings exist. Now, you can go on the Old Bailey online and you can type in sugar nips, though they might think you're some sort of deviant, or sugar nippers, and you can press return, and you're not going to get any results. If you go in and press tongs, you'll get results. Sugar tongs, you'll get results. But you will get the most results of the period when these were manufactured for tea tongs. They are silver tea tongs. And it's best to call them that, because if you're talking to anyone that collects silver and has an interest, they will immediately know you mean this form of tong and not this form. So we have silver tea tongs, and then we have silver sugar tongs. Frustratingly, the very earliest form of sugar tong, I don't have an example to show you. And latterly, if I come across a pair, I'll film them and I'll upload them so you can see what they are. But I'll briefly describe them, because we're going to run through a history of sugar tongs from the earliest times to the end of the 18th century. And then we're going to have a look at these in little short videos after this individually, so I can pick up some general and hopefully interesting points. The first sugar tongs that come in about 1685, 1690. We're very fond, unlike the Chinese, of polluting our tea with big lumps of sugar and lots of milk and cream, or at least I am. So you needed utensils to delicately do this rather than stick your hand in the sugar bowl. The first form, somebody thought, well, you know, what are we going to make these? It's a new form. It didn't exist before. How are we going to make these? What are we going to use? And then he probably looked over, the first silversmith that thought of this, and saw, you know, a servant picking coals out of the fire with a big pair of fire tongs, and thought, well, coals like big lump of coal, small lump of sugar. I have a plan. And so the first type of sugar tong, made for a period of about 25, 30 years, are called andiron tongs, and they are based on a large pair of fireside tongs that you would use for coal, just reduced in size. There are two methods to make them. The first is to cast the arms with little bowls, little spoon bowls, and then cast a separate part for the bow. And that will be, they'll be quite thick gauge and quite heavy, and they'll be sprung, and they usually break because they're cast. So they'll all have little repairs on them. The second type are where a continuous strip of metal has been hammered round, and it imitates that sort of curled shape at the top and goes down, and it has two little spoon bowls that are either hammered into the silver or cast and applied. It'll also have at the top a little casting or a little ball or a little turning of silver soldered in, so they look like miniature fire tongs. And you can't mistake them. They'll usually be Maker's Mark only, or they'll have Maker's Mark and either a standard mark or a Britannia standard mark. And as we found out recently, and this is too complicated to go in now, but you can have sterling silver in the Britannia period, and you can have Britannia silver outside, ongoing after the Britannia period ended. So what we thought was hard and fast dating and saying these have to be made in 1720 or later, actually it doesn't apply these days. They can be earlier. We'll address that on another day. I don't want to explode your mind too much. They're quite rare. You won't see them that often. What you might do, and please be aware of this, is confuse them for miniature fire tongs that were made for dolls' houses at the same period. In fact, they probably survive in equally large numbers. And they were usually made by a man called David Clayton. So if you see David Clayton's mark on a small pair of tongs, they will probably be miniature tongs. They will not be small-sized tongs for the service of sugar. It's all very complicated, I know. It gets easier. In about 1720, the style of the sugar tong changes completely. One day some bright spark makes beautiful sugar tongs, tea tongs. See, I'm doing it now. Tea tongs. Let's call them tongs. It'd be so much easier if we did. Tea tongs that look like this. They're scissor action form. The very earliest ones, again, I don't have a pair of these to show you because styles change over the years. They're much simpler arms here. This you can see is a shell bowl. They tend to be spoon bowls. And the hinge, which for 50 years is circular, this very early period, it's rectangular. And you tend to have just circular grips without the little bit there. I'll talk more about these in a short film afterwards, but we'll just do the history of sugar tongs for now. This style comes in 1720. It persists until the 1770s, rarely into 1775. You will find the odd pair. Someone will say, I've got a pair from Hallmark for 1790. these will be aberrations. It's just a customer that's gone in and desperately wanted a pair, and the silversmith has accommodated them. By 1770, 1775, these have had their swan song. They are reproduced in the Victorian period. They come back at the end of George IV's reign. They start to become popular again in novelty and cast forms. Much, it has to be said, much thicker, much heavier, much more elaborate. But really, that's the first true phase, 1720 to 1770 in the 18th century. They are supplanted by something you probably all recognise as a pair of sugar tongs, which are these. But they too draw on the same skill set as these. These are cast. The arms and the bowls all cast in one piece. Extremely decorative, extremely detailed. The only difference is now that rather than have a hinge which takes all the force and action, you have a bow. You have this separate bow. This is wrought, this is hammered, because it has to be strong. It's basically a spring. So you can do that with it. And these are what we call 3-piece cast open work sugar tongs. Not long after these are first introduced in about 1764, it must be said in 1764-65 they're a novelty. They really take hold by 1770. By 1770, so there is a period where you could either have a set of teaspoons and tongs like this, or a set of teaspoons and tongs like this. If you're in 1765, this is the norm. This is the new novelty. By 1770, this is old hat. This is what everybody wants. But there is a crossover period, and you will find the same makers producing both of these forms at the same time. So one form doesn't immediately supplant another. These are as fragile as those. So silversmiths that make these also start making them with solid cast arms. And again, I'm afraid I haven't got a pair to show you, but this whole section will be solid. It will still be shaped and decorated and covered with flowers and scrolls and roundels and all manner of decoration. They're quite remarkable things. And the bowls, of course, change. But again, I'll talk more about those in a little separate film before I run out of time. These keep being made until 1780, 1785. By 1785, they are uncommon and old-fashioned, because in about 1770, 1775, so I mean it all moves quite quickly, you start to get tongs like this. You start to get people moving away from cast rococo decoration, which is really the forte of these tongs, and we're all about bright cutting and neoclassicism. We're all about sparkle. These, of course, are easy to make as well, because you make them in one piece, one continuous piece of silver. And rolled silver, sheet silver, is becoming much more easily available and much less expensive because of mechanisation, because of the Industrial Revolution. So it makes sense, financial sense, to make them like this and not like this. Though there is a crossover, and the reason these are placed last is they're the latest dating pair, but actually they're made in an earlier style to these. These are just one piece of silver. That's all. These are 3 pieces of silver, just like these were made. These are the sort of transition. It all goes in stages. And here the arms have either been rolled or cast. I think the bowls have been cast with a length of metal which has then been rolled. So they're quite unusual, actually. And then the bow has been wrought and they've been soldered on. But again, I'll talk to you more about those 2 forms in a separate video, if you can stand it. my God, he's going to do more videos about sugar tongs, if you can stand it. But that takes us up to the end of the 18th century. So there's a very broad collecting field. It's a very interesting field. And as I say, if you can bear it, more detail to follow. But until then, goodbye.